What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and today we're talking about some Chaos Demons. The Chaos Demons Codex is finally solidified in the 40k metagame, and the shape of Chaos Demons list is finally coming together, so I figured it was high time to talk about the best units in the Codex. As always, if you enjoy my 40k coverage, go ahead and hit like, hit subscribe underneath that video. It really helps me out, and I appreciate it. You know, the YouTube spiel. And let's get into the video. As befits the 8 points of the Chaos Star, I'm going to be covering the 8 best units in the Chaos Demons Codex. Although, there'll also be some honorable mentions in here, so really it's like 8 in a little bit. But that's the spirit of chaos. You can't restrict yourself to rules. Most of this list is going to be personal preference, and while I have been playing Demons quite a bit, and if you haven't checked it out yet, my Twitch replay channel is available over at youtube.com/tacticaltortoisetv, and you can find my games with Chaos Demons hosted there. If you want to check them out, please do so. I wholeheartedly reserve the right to be totally incorrect. But anyway, starting at the bottom in ascending order, let's talk about the 8th best unit in Chaos Demons, that being the Demon Prince. Unlike the greater demons that are kind of the focus of this codex, Demon Prince can be character protected, so that's pretty cool. He's also got some pretty sweet combinations with the relics and warlord traits in each of the demon subfactions. I'm especially excited about a Khorne Demon Prince that can get 8 Strength 9 AP 3/4 damage attacks by equipping Argath, Lord of Blades.
Oh, that's a lot of damage!
For a little friend who can't be shot at, unlike the big greater demons, he can wander around the table and just pick up targets and mop up problems that the other greater demons can't quite deal with. The biggest downside of the Demon Prince, though, is Bellacor doesn't like them. And Bellacor is, I think, a central piece of the faction. So any list that is bringing him is not going to be able to take Demon Princes, which does force him down a little bit on this list. Next up, we have Plague Drones, and this is a little bit of an interesting one for me. The Nurgle subfaction is all about buffing your core Plague Bearer units, which includes not only Plague Bearers, which makes sense, but also Plague Drones themselves, who have both the core and Plague Bearer keyword. They work with a lot of the internal synergies from the Nurgle characters, as well as being able to revive them with things like the Doomsday Bell on the Great Unclean One. The downside is that Plague Drones don't do a ton of damage, although they are incredibly tanky for their cost at a high toughness with 5 wounds and access to all of Nurgle's defensive effects. Not to mention the ability to respawn them with that aforementioned Doomsday Bell. The downside I see of normal Plague Bearers is that they're too easy to kill, so your synergies don't really work that well, especially trying to respawn those guys if they're basically a similar level of survivability to a regular Space Marine, a profile that is not lauded as being incredibly tanky in the current metagame of Warhammer 40,000. Plague Drones, on the other hand, are tough to kill and can still benefit from all those synergies, which means that I think a big unit of them is central to most pure Nurgle armies. Moving up the world to appropriately number 6, we have Demonets. These are one of the cheapest troops options in the game, only competing with Blue Horrors, who are a very bad unit. Demonets, on the other hand, are move 10 and can perform actions. That's it. That's all you need to know. Consider this situation, one that's come up in basically every game of Demons I've played, where Demonets having a 4+ demonic save against ranged attacks are pretty tough to kill, especially if your opponent doesn't have a ton of shooting. They can deploy on the line within range of an out of deployment zone objective. They can immediately move as soon as the first turn begins and jump on that objective to drop a banner, and you're good to go. They also have a boatload of attacks, so they can mop up other cheap objective secured units and provide fast, lethal objective secured themselves. The downside is their expensive point cost, but honestly, I think that's probably fine. Next up in the list, we have the big daddy demon himself, Bellacor. Now, I mentioned before that I thought Bellacore was going to be central to a lot of Chaos Demons lists, and the reason for that is that this big guy shares not only the Supreme Commander keyword, but every single Allegiance keyword in the Codex. That's pretty important because he's also a Warp Locust, which means that you can deep strike units wholly within 6 inches of him if they're arriving out of demonic manifestation. In addition, being a Supreme Commander and having all of the Allegiance abilities means that he can go into his own detachment, and while this does create some problems for list building, it means that you unlock all 4 gods worth of Warp Storm abilities without having to do any of the actual work. Bellacore is really the dark side of Chaos Demons list building.
Is the dark side stronger?
No, busier, more seductive, more seductive, more seductive.
He's easier and more direct, but probably on the whole less powerful than the light side of taking actual detachments full of your demons. That's because Bellacore, if he's in his own Supreme Command, also steals your Warlord trait slot, and Chaos Demon armies do not have a way to get an additional Warlord trait, meaning that he turns off most of the most exciting combos in the whole codex. Honestly, Bellacore would be higher on this list if it weren't for this weird inconsistency. It makes lists with Bellacore difficult to construct, but he has so many powerful support effects that it's probably worth it. Not the least of which being a reroll aura for any demon unit, including the big characters. He also has access to his own Noctic discipline of psychic powers, meaning that he doesn't compete with any of the other Allegiant disciplines for psychic casts. So if you're going heavily into Slaanesh or Tzeentch, for example, you're going to still have additional powers for Bellacore to cast. His powers are also pretty solid, and he has some good synergies, especially with infantry-based armies with his Shrouded Step. He's generally a good toolbox, pretty decent melee, pretty difficult to kill. He does make list building awkward, which is why he's not quite higher on this list, and he is expensive at a nice 420 points. But overall, probably worth the package. As a Tyranid player at heart, one of my favorite things to do in 40k is cast inordinate numbers of psychic powers with huge bonuses, which is why at number 4, I've put the Lord of Change. This is probably the most controversial pick on this list because I don't know if Lord of Changes are that exciting for a lot of people, but
I love Big Bird. I actually like you too.
With a 3+ demonic save against ranged attacks and access to the Impossible Robe to turn one failed save to a 0 damage attack once per phase, not battle round, that's phase. So he gets one in the shooting phase, and then if he gets charged, he gets another one in the fight phase. The Lord of Change is actually extremely difficult to kill. He can also adopt an Exalted trait for -1 to be hit with ranged attacks, and he generally operates pretty far away from the front line, so he's not always in mortal danger from the melee attacks that he has the least defense against. If your opponent is just trying to shoot him to death, they probably won't be able to. He's just too hard to kill at range. They have to get to grips with him, which means that they have to move up into your range of your melee units or short-range weapons, which is good for you. On top of that, he casts 3 times with access to an additional one with the Tzeentch stratagem, and at his top profile, which he should be at for most of the game, gets a base +2 to cast. This stacks with the Tzeentch +1 to cast Warp Storm ability, meaning that this guy can be casting up to 4 times at a massive +3 bonus. With his high casting bonuses, I think the Lord of Changes turns on a lot of the internal Tzeentch subfaction synergies, and I just really like him.
I actually like you too.
And with that, we'll move on to another greater demon, next up being the Bloodthirster. I spent a whole multi-minute video talking about exactly how sweet I thought Bloodthirsters were, so if you want me to talk about all of the different builds of Bloodthirsters that you can get absolute ludicrous damage or survivability out of, go check that video out. Long story short, Bloodthirsters are big, tanky boys that hit super hard in melee. They can swing with a billion attacks, up to 3 damage with their 2-handed axe, or just a lower number of D3 +4 damage attacks once upgraded with Argath Lord of Blades, or you can build them to be super tanky, with an 8-wound face cap, 5+ damage ignore, and the ability to heal wounds over the course of the game, meaning that that face cap goes a really, really long way. The Warp Locust effect is also incredibly powerful for these guys, since being able to only take 8 wounds per phase and deep strike themselves, especially wholly within 6 inches of Bellacore, he's going to be up in the middle of the table anyway, means that these guys don't have to take early shooting and can operate sort of in the center of the battlefield from turn 2 onwards. They're super tough to deal with, most opponents don't have an easy way to kill them, and they do ridiculous damage. I think most Chaos Demons lists are going to be wrecking at least one Bloodthirster going on into the future. Now moving on to number 2. All of the Zinc Heralds are particularly good for synergies with other models in the subfaction, which I'm sure we'll discuss later on in this video, and just being really good utility units. But that said, probably the best version of the Zinc Herald is the Fate Skimmer. I'll admit this is one that probably went right over my head the first time I read through the Codex, but the Fate Skimmer's real power level comes from this little upgrade here, the Retinue of Horrors, which for 5 points just gives him a baked-in +1 to cast. The Fate Skimmer's base profile is also pretty good, with 9 wounds, making it kind of difficult to kill. It slaps a little bit in melee, getting 6 Screamer attacks at strength 6 AP3 2 damage, and the ability to equip a Staff of Sorcery, which also fires 3 2 damage shots at range. At a 14-inch move with the ability to fly, this guy also doesn't get pinned down that often. With a kind of tanky profile, especially with Lookoutser, a cast bonus, a decent gun, and kind of okay melee stats, this guy's basically a little mini Lord of Change. Obviously, there's a big trade-off there, but a Fate Skimmer is about half the cost of a Lord of Change, so there is definitely a consideration of taking 2 Fate Skimmers in place of a single Lord of Change. The one downside, I think, is the points cost at 150 points. They are a lot, but you get a lot for that 150 points, and that's why they're at the number 2 spot here. Now, with that, we'll move on to some honorable mentions. The first one I have is the Soul Grinder. I like this guy because Chaos Demons don't really shoot that well, and the Soul Grinder is the one exception to that. Having at least one gun in your army is a pretty good idea. It keeps your opponent's head down, it stops them from deploying out in the open, or getting too aggressive with cheap units that they know you have to commit expensive units to kill. On top of that, the Soul Grinder gets different abilities depending on which allegiance keyword you give it, and all of them are pretty good. The only downside one, I guess, is maybe Zinc, which gives you a 4+ demonic save in melee, but at toughness 8 with a 4+ save against ranged attacks, and unlike the greater demons, the ability to hide behind obscuring terrain, the Soul Grinders are actually very difficult to kill to begin with. You can give it the Nurgle Allegiance effect to increase its toughness to 9, and then it becomes extremely difficult to remove. While they are 200 points, which can be difficult to fit into an army that's running multiple greater demons, on the whole, they're pretty tanky, have decent ranged attacks, solid melee, and just generally are all around pretty good. I definitely overvalue the ranged attacks as well, since again, there's nothing really else in the Demon Codex that shoots quite as hard. Last but not least, for honorable mentions, we'll talk about the Exalted Flamer. He's a character protectable dude that shoots a couple big 3 damage gunshots and can buff nearby Flamer units. That's pretty good. There's not much else to say about him. He's pretty straightforward. Just a laser beam that you can't shoot back at. Those are always pretty solid. And last, but certainly not least, if you've watched my other videos about Chaos Demons, you're probably not too surprised about the #1 pick for the faction, because it is the Zinc Flamer unit. This unit is absolutely ludicrous. At 3 wounds apiece at toughness 4 with a 3+ demonic save against ranged attacks, they're relatively tanky and have some of the most extreme damage output I've seen in the game for a little infantry unit. At D6 plus 3 Strength 5 AP2 ranged attacks with the core keyword, so it's buffable by psychic powers like Infernal Flames to give them +1 to wound, or rerolls from a nearby Zinc Herald like a Fate Skimmer. At only 25 points a model, these things do absolutely ludicrous damage. For 150 points, you get 6d6 plus 18 auto-hitting shots that probably wound on 4s or 3s, rerolling ones at AP2, and that's so many saves forced on a unit that they're going to be highly reduced, if not dead. I did make a whole video about exactly how disgusting Flamers were and their profile against a lot of units in the game. On average, they blow up most T7 vehicles, and you can also wombo combo them between a Psychic Power and a nearby Exalted Flamer to get to Strength 7, meaning that even Toughness 7 vehicles are not safe from their predations. In my opinion, if you're playing a Demons list and it doesn't start with 2 to 3 units of Zinc Flamers, I think you're just doing it wrong. They're definitely the defining unit of the Codex and certainly the most powerful unit in the entirety of the book. While the rest of the Chaos Demons Codex is strong, I'm not sure that it is quite as powerful as the top echelon of the metagame without the inclusion of Zinc Flamers. The one downside of the Flamers is that they're relatively slow, at least compared to gun lines. While they are move 12 flying units with the ability to advance and fire their weapons, being assault weapons, they don't really outrange a lot of long-range guns. That changes if you start including units like Bellacore, however, who can teleport them around with the Shrouded Step Psychic Power. You can also just demonically manifest them anywhere on the table if you want to, and especially if you have your big greater demons up in the mix, reducing enemy leadership and allowing your Zinc Flamers to come closer in and bypass enemy screens. Just add some gravy on top. Seriously, I think most games with Chaos Demons are all about putting your big greater demons in harm's way, forcing your opponent to come out of their hidey hole to deal with them, otherwise lose on primary objective points, then counterpunch with the Flamers and kill the entirety of their army. These guys are absolutely disgusting, and I don't think there's much more I can say about them. And with that, that's all of the best units in the Chaos Demons Codex. Let me know down in the comments if you have any other entries you thought I missed or things that you disagree with. I would like to hear what you think. Thanks everyone for watching to the end of the video. Thanks especially to everyone who supports the channel either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members and Twitch subscribers as well. All you people are amazing. I appreciate your supplications to the dark gods. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and effective wargaming.